What is going on, everyone? Let's talk about the state capital of California, Sacramento. The nickname for Sacramento is simply Sac-Town, kind of straightforward, to the point. Sacramento is right here, in case you don't know. It's about an hour and a half to 2 hours from San Francisco, and it's about an hour and 13 minutes away from an elephant sanctuary. Sacramento has about 500,000 residents, and hardly any of them know about the elephant sanctuary. Sac-Town was incorporated on February 27, 1850. Been there a while. Sacramento is named after the Christian rite, the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist, more commonly known as Holy Communion. If you're not familiar with that whole thing, I'll explain it. Holy Communion is a rite that you have to do when you've been forced to go to a Catholic school by your parents. In my case, that was from 1st grade through 7th grade, when the nuns decided they had had enough of your old pal Briggs and told my parents no amount of tuition would be worth having me there any longer. That was actually written on a letter. Apparently, I drove one nun to do some heavy day drinking. But hey, back to the communion thing. During church services, everybody lines up at the front of the church, and a priest takes a couple big gulps of wine, staggers down the altar, and starts sticking bread in your mouth that tastes like it was made out of paper and a dash of Elmer's glue. Moving on. Sacramento is becoming a hotspot for people priced out of the Bay Area. Why not? It's a great town. But like all cities, it's not for everyone. So why don't you grab a glass of wine, kneel down, and watch my top 10 reasons not to move to Sacramento. Number 10. It's the capital. Sacramento is the state capital, which means it's a pain in the nether regions just to live there. There's far too much traffic any time of the day. In the downtown areas and even outside the downtown areas, you're going to have a hard time finding parking. There's often far too many tourists any time of the year, and the California state capital is usually an ideal place for conventions and protests to break out. I was there just this last October, only for a day. While I was there, I noticed they had some kind of convention going on, and they were everywhere. These people were everywhere. It was like some weird Amway cult from Mexico. They all dressed the same. They all acted like a cult. It was weird. Number 9. The roads. Many residents all over the city complain about the roads here. Some say there are way too many potholes, and now you would think the officials would be on top of this one, seeing that it's the capital city and all. Others complain the windiness of the roads in some areas make them sick on a regular basis. If you ever visit or actually relocate, you'll notice this. And stop typing. I know the whole place isn't built like a frickin' roller coaster. I've been there in October, like I said, and a few other times some years back. And a couple of these areas like Riverside, Pocket, Little Pocket, and Southland Park, they get a little weird, you have to admit. And if you're not from there, it can get a little confusing. I'm sure a lot less now that they have, navigation devices in everyone's phone and cars, but still. Number 8. The heat. Sacramento's hot. Temperatures in the winters usually don't dip under the mid-40s, while in the summers, temperatures can get into the hundreds on a really hot day. But usually in the summer, they stay around the mid-90s. When I was there in October, it was like 95 degrees. It's not supposed to be 95 degrees in October. That's just a fact. All those cult members, they looked miserable. It was so hot. Number 7. Urban campers. Homelessness is a major issue here in Sac-Town. It's unfortunate to know that about 4,000 residents in the city have fallen on hard times and are now forced to live on the streets. And stop typing. I am sure some are just heavy drug users or whatever other way you want to paint them. The fact is, other citizens are living on the street, and some didn't bring it upon themselves. Now, thankfully, the city does have a good amount of shelters. However, there's still a large population of those homeless residents who aren't taking advantage of the shelters and other state and city programs. It's too bad. They have a lot. When I was there in October, they were all over the parks. The good news is, if you need directions someplace, you just ask one of them. They know the city real well. Number 6. Crime. Crime is pretty rampant here in Sacramento. For every 100,000 residents, there's almost 4,000 crimes committed. While you're in the city, you have a 1 in 28 chance of being involved in a crime. And you're only safer here than in 10% of other cities in the United States. That means there's only 10% of the cities in the country are worse than Sacramento. That's not a good stat. The overall crime rate is 32% higher than the national average. Just this last summer, in 2018, an Uber driver decided Ubering wasn't where he wanted to be career-wise. So while he had 3 young ladies in the car, he decided to become a kidnapper too. The girls got out and were safe, just a little shaken up, and I imagine he's going to be doing some hard time. Number 5. Pollution. California is notorious for being dirty, so it's no surprise that Sacramento is one of the dirtier cities within the state. According to the pollution index, the city's pollution is 205% worse than the national average. I can tell you, it was kind of disappointing when I was there in October. When I visited in the early 2000s, I don't remember it being that dirty. I really wasn't downtown much back then. This time I was, and it was nasty. Reminded me of some of the more rundown areas of downtown LA. It was kind of gross. Number 4. It's crowded. Sacramento is extremely crowded. The population of the city is now 500,000 residents. The city has been growing at a rate of 1.4%, making Sacramento the fastest growing city in the state of California. If this trend continues, the population should hit about 2.5 million people by 2025. That number doesn't shock me at all, but I'm sure it'll slow down at some point, probably really soon, as home prices start to creep up. Right now they aren't cheap by most state standards, but it's California, so you have to add 30% right off the bat for sunshine and being able to tell people you live in California. And that's honestly two of the reasons I left California. I don't feel like paying extra for weather and bragging rights. Doesn't even make sense. Number 3, the Golden State Killer. Now, rest easy, he has been captured, so you're safe. But you'll get asked about the Golden State Killer fairly often. I have a couple friends that have told me this. I have one friend, Keegan. She said that people ask her about this all the time. She sells real estate near Sacramento and said people ask about him and other serial killers like they're asking if there's any parks nearby. She said that it's weird. It's like people have gone, do you have any serial killers in the neighborhood? Like there's a database telling you where they are and we just don't go pick them up or something. Anyway, unless you've been living under a rock or spent most of your time at an elephant sanctuary trying to get the taste of communion bread out of your mouth for the last year or so, the Golden State Killer committed crimes from 1984 to 1986 in Sacramento County, then later in Southern California. This individual has now been identified as Joseph D'Angelo, and he's a former police officer. He was captured thanks to Ancestry DNA. One of his relatives apparently did one of those DNA tests, and it pinged their system, and so they tracked it down and got his DNA and figured out he was the dude. He's like 70 years old and he's in prison now. I'm sure for the rest of his life. Number 2, allergies and sunburns. I read an article a couple years ago that I almost talked about in another California video, but it got cut for time. Anyway, in the article, it went on to say that people relocating to this part of California are just wrecked by allergies, which totally makes sense because Sacramento is surrounded by nothing but farms and fields. If you didn't have allergies before, you probably will when you get to Sacramento. The other part of the article was about people not realizing how harsh the sun was on their skin when they first moved there. This one I can relate to. I grew up blocks off the beach in Southern California and spent far too many years surfing and laying on a beach in nothing but a pair of shorts. Right now I'm going through some stuff with my skin that I hope works out, and it's because of those days. My wife's friend is an esthetician. I actually talked to her about it. She said that sunblock, moisturizer, and wrinkle cream are your best friends in California. She recommended a company called Murad, M-U-R-A-D. Anyway, and no, they're not paying me to say that. I'm just trying to help you guys out. Wear sunscreen. And number 1, the cost of living. Do you like overpaying for everything? Do you have too much money? Are you the type of person that says things like, money's no object? If you're that guy, pack up some gold bricks into the Bentley and head to Sacramento, California. I found your new home. The cost of living in Sacramento is absolutely horrible, and it isn't nearly as bad as San Francisco, an hour and a half to the east. You should expect groceries in Sacramento to be 17% higher than the national average, while transportation and housing are 30 and 20% higher than the national average. The overall cost of living for the city is roughly 16% higher than the national average. In other words, California treats you like a sucker at a used car lot. Keep that in mind if you're thinking about moving to California. It is not cheap. And that is the worst part about California, is cost. Everything costs more. And that's why so many people are leaving.